Hey guys! Tonight we drift through ancient Basra, where the desert winds tangle through market stalls, and the scent of cardamom, ink and camel sweat mixes with the chatter of traders. But instead of a battle-hardened warrior or a sultry assassin, tonight's hero is a boy, a quiet one with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. You won't find him wielding a sword, but trust me, his brain is sharper than any blade. And yes, you probably wouldn't last 5 minutes debating him. Our story today is about the great follower Ayyas ibn Muawiyah. May God be pleased with him. To be honest with you, I wouldn't be surprised if they attributed Ayyas ibn Muawiyah's intelligence to being twice that of Einstein. Brothers, this is the last person you'd want to engage in a discussion or debate with, because he challenges arguments in a way that psychologically complicates them, turning matters into an abyss from which it's difficult to escape. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing who's listening in the middle of the night. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're 8 years old, barefoot on the cool stone floor of a dusty old schoolhouse. Your writing tablet rests on your knees, smeared with ink and the scattered remnants of half-learned grammar drills. The day is hot, so hot that even the flies seem too lazy to buzz. Your teacher, a stern-faced Christian man with ink-stained fingers and a surprising talent for sarcasm, is leaning back against the doorway, chatting with 2 friends who've dropped by. They're older men, with sunburned faces and tunics crinkled at the elbows, and they've brought with them the usual grown-up swagger, loud laughs, dry bread, and a small clay jug of something they pretend isn't wine. You're not really supposed to be listening. You're supposed to be reviewing possessive pronouns in Syriac or diagramming a sentence about goats. But how can you not eavesdrop when the air starts to fill with scoffs and snickers? Have you heard what the Muslims believe about paradise? One of the men chuckles. The other waves his hand dramatically. Oh yes, gardens of delight, rivers of honey, and food that never runs out. They all burst out laughing. And no toilets, says the first, raising an eyebrow. That's the best part. Eat and eat, and still no relief. Seems like a recipe for spiritual constipation. Even your teacher joins in. Imagine, he says, half mocking, half curious. All that food and not a single need to relieve yourself. It's impossible, boys. Makes you wonder if anyone thought this through. Their laughter echoes like tin bells in the quiet room. You sit very still, your hands folded over your knees. They think you're not paying attention. Just a little boy with ink on his sleeve and a head full of grammar. But you're listening, every word. And then, softly, calmly, in a voice that sounds far too measured for someone your age, you say, "If you are so certain that this is impossible, why not go to paradise yourself and find out?" You don't even look up as you say it. Just speak the words, quiet and clean, like someone pointing out an unguarded hole in a fortress wall. The silence that follows is immediate. The teacher's smile fades. His 2 friends glance at one another, unsure whether to laugh or be offended. You can feel the shift in the air, that sharp pause when grown men realize a child has just out-reasoned them. But you don't stop there. You finally raise your eyes and meet your teacher's stare. Not defiant, not smug, just curious. Teacher, you continue gently, you know that most of what we eat benefits the body. Only a small part needs to be removed. The rest is absorbed into us, used for energy, for strength. You shift your tiny ink-smeared hand in the air like a little philosopher drawing diagrams out of dust. So what if in paradise, everything we eat is beneficial? What if there's no waste because there's no imperfection? Why do you assume it works like the world does? Your voice doesn't rise. You don't preach. You simply lay it out, like puzzle pieces sliding into place. The teacher leans back slightly, blinking. His two friends mumble something and busy themselves with the jug, pretending not to look flustered. Your teacher opens his mouth to respond, then stops. He tries again, but all he can manage is a sheepish chuckle. "Ah, go back to your book, boy," he says, waving you off. This talk is for grown men. But his tone has changed. Gone is the mocking lilt. Now it's something else, an awkward mix of embarrassment and admiration. Because he knows. Everyone in the room knows. You just held your ground against a room full of adult men, using logic, observation, and quiet conviction. And not just held your ground, you won. That night, word spreads through the neighborhood. People chuckle and shake their heads. The judge's boy, the one with the serious eyes and the serious mouth, took down 3 adults in one sentence. Mainstream scholars like to talk about Ayyas the grown-up judge, the master of riddles and courtroom games. But the truth is, you were already this way before you could even grow a beard. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't need to. You had something better, clarity. And your teacher, he never mocks paradise again. He never mocks Islam again. In fact, he treats you with a strange, reverent respect from that day forward. No more sarcastic barbs. No more sidelong jokes. Just nods and short glances, as though unsure whether you're a student or something else entirely. Oh no, I forgot to tell you what era our hero lived in. I was excited when I read about his first encounter with his teacher when he was 8 years old. Amazing, isn't it? Anyway, bring a second, third, and fourth cup of tea. Bring them all today. You'll really enjoy it. That's the first time people start whispering your name with raised eyebrows. Ayyas ibn Muawiyah. You grow up in the 8th century, under the Umayyad Caliphate. The world around you is a clash of caravans, calligraphy, and conquest. Cities swell with knowledge. Scholars argue about stars, ethics, even whether washing with cold water counts for ablution. But while others chase fame through long scrolls and poetry, you chase one thing: truth. The kind that hides under clever disguises and polite smiles. By the time you're 15, your reputation precedes you. People say you can see through walls. Not literally, of course, though some swear you once found a stolen falcon hidden behind a mud brick chimney just by watching the owner's eyes flicker. That's exaggeration. Kind of. But what's true is your uncanny ability to sniff out lies like a fox hunting dates in a granary. Historians still argue whether your intellect came from divine inspiration or just freakish observational skills. But what's certain is that by your 20s, you were appointed as a judge, Qadi, in Basra, one of the intellectual capitals of the early Islamic world. Imagine a dusty, sun-bleached city humming with debate, with scholars quoting Aristotle one moment and Quranic verses the next. It's in this heady mix that you, Ayyas, hold court. But here's what sets you apart. You don't just interpret the law. You play people like a well-tuned oud. One time, 2 men came into your court, both claiming to be the father of a little boy. The boy was too young to speak clearly, and each man had a plausible story. You said nothing at first, just watched. Then you asked both men to walk away down the street, and when they were out of earshot, you whispered something to the boy. He smiled. Then you asked the child to point to his real father, not with words, but with his eyes. He did. And you just nodded. People stared. "That's it?" one man asked, incredulous. But when you explained the logic, the way the boy's pupils dilated at one man and not the other, how his posture changed, how he relaxed in proximity to his real father, suddenly, silence again. One quirky story says you once identified a thief not by what he said, but by how he chewed a date. You had everyone in the market sample dates from the same pile, and only one person chewed it a little slower. Nervous, maybe. Hiding something? You zeroed in. Turns out he'd stolen a date the day before from the same merchant and was afraid you'd make him chew that one too. You didn't. You didn't need to. And no, this wasn't some Sherlock Holmes fantasy. This was recorded, albeit with the haze of centuries of retelling, in early Islamic biographical traditions. Think of it as the Hadith meets Law and Order, Abbasid unit. But being sharp isn't always an asset. You develop a habit of asking judges questions in their own courtrooms. Not to embarrass them, okay? Sometimes to embarrass them, but mostly to learn. You're fascinated by the why of justice, not just is it fair, but does it feel true to a child, a widow, a traveller? At one trial, you stop everything because a witness fidgeted too much when swearing an oath. You cross-examine, not aggressively, just patiently. Turns out the man had memorized someone else's testimony. When confronted, he confessed without prompting. You didn't shout. You simply tilted your head, like a falcon sizing up a rabbit, and said, "Next time, write your lie on your own tongue." That phrase, it sticks. Merchants begin repeating it. Mothers mutter it to squabbling sons. It becomes a kind of urban proverb. Not bad for someone barely in his 30s. Historians still debate whether your style of judging was revolutionary or just unusually efficient. Some argue you bent protocol too often. Others say you never once ruled unjustly, even if your methods raised eyebrows among the more traditional clerics. By now, you've built a reputation not just in Basra, but across the whole region. People travel for days, sometimes weeks, just to have their cases heard by you. Not because your judgments are lenient. Oh no. You're fair, but you're also terrifyingly precise. It's like handing your secrets to someone who already knows them. One day, a peculiar case waddles its way into your courtroom, quite literally. 2 men stand before you, both tugging on a rope tied around the neck of a very confused-looking camel. They're arguing over who owns it. Each presents a seemingly airtight story. The camel was raised on their land, fed from their palms, loved like a child. It's classic he said territory. But you don't ask about feeding schedules or markings on the camel. Instead, you tell both men to leave the room. Then you instruct your court assistant to let the camel loose and quietly observe which way it walks. It ambles straight to one of the doors and begins chewing at it with suspicious familiarity. You nod. "The camel has judged," you say calmly. The owner's door smelled like hay and nostalgia, apparently. That story becomes famous, but what people miss is your real brilliance. You never trust appearances. You test. You listen. You invite mistakes, then pounce on the little cracks they leave behind. In another case, a man accuses a neighbor of poisoning his well. The water turned sour overnight, and naturally, blame is the currency of panic. You listen carefully to the angry tirade, then glance at the accused. He looks stunned, almost insulted. Instead of demanding evidence, you ask both men to drink from the well. The accuser hesitates. The accused walks up and gulps it down without flinching. You raise an eyebrow. Strange, you murmur. He drinks from a poisoned well. Yet only your story feels bitter. Cue awkward throat clearing. Later, it's discovered the well had just gone stagnant for a day. Nothing more. But you didn't need to wait for that. You read people like a merchant reads worn coin edges. And then came the snake case. Oh, the snake case. A family claims their infant son was bitten by a neighbor's exotic pet cobra. The neighbor denies ever owning a snake. The child, thankfully, survives. But the family wants restitution. You bring both parties in and, without preamble, ask a random guard to open a sack at the back of the courtroom. No one knows what's in it. The moment the sack is touched, the neighbor flinches. Badly. His eyes flick to a corner of the room where, sure enough, a woven basket sits half concealed behind a curtain. You walk over, lift the curtain, and reveal a basket labeled in faded ink. Food for Musa. Musa, it turns out, is the name of his pet possum, a cobra. Well-fed, well-loved, and absolutely real. And that, folks, is how you catch a liar using nothing but a burlap sack and an instinct for guilt reflexes. You've got a flair for drama, sure, but it's never about showmanship. It's always about pressure. Pressure reveals truth, like heat draws ink from invisible letters. You once said justice isn't just about laws, it's about patterns. Patterns in speech, in silence, in footsteps left behind in sand. That brings us to the shadow case, a strange little dispute involving two brothers and an inheritance of land. One claims the other forged documents to claim a portion of their deceased father's farmland. The documents look authentic, stamped and everything. Witnesses, bribes, oaths, it's all there. But something bothers you. You ask them to show you exactly where the disputed land lies. The next day, you visit the farm. Not with a grand entourage, just you, a donkey, and a skeptical breeze. You walk the property slowly, asking each brother to describe where the boundaries were back when they were boys. That's when you notice something odd. One brother keeps shading his eyes, looking east when recalling the fence. The other doesn't. You wait. Then you ask a quiet, brilliant question. Which way did the sun cast your father's shadow when he prayed on this land? The first brother replies confidently. The second fumbles. Later, it turns out the forgery used an older land map. But the house had been rotated during a renovation, changing the direction of prayer. The man didn't know that because he hadn't lived there. Mainstream historians agree that these stories, though occasionally polished by time, reflect a judge whose investigative techniques were centuries ahead of his era. Ayyas was basically doing 8th century psychological profiling. But not everyone was a fan. Some contemporaries thought your methods were undignified. There's a fringe scholar who once wrote that Ayyas listens more to shadows and camels than to scriptures. A decent burn in medieval terms. Others claimed you made justice feel like theatre, turning sacred courts into guessing games. Historians still argue whether this was just jealousy or genuine concern about protocol. But honestly, you couldn't have cared less. For you, the law wasn't a scroll to be recited. It was a puzzle to be solved. And sometimes that meant noticing that a liar blinks too fast when asked about a snake. As your fame grows, people begin to bring you increasingly bizarre cases. At one point, a trader accuses another of swapping out a bag of rare saffron for dyed sand. You listen, tap your finger on the bench, then do something very Ayyas-like. You ask for a live cat. Confused? That's fair. The room certainly was. But you have the sand and saffron bags placed side by side, and the cat is released. It sniffs around and curls up on one bag, the one filled with real saffron. Cats, after all, aren't stupid. And saffron smells expensive. You smirk and say, "May we all learn to be as honest as this cat." And honestly, that's not even in the top 10 strangest things you've said in court. What would you say if I told you that the stories I've shared with you are just a drop in the ocean, and that there are other stories that will make you feel like Judge Ayas isn't even human? You'll find yourself in a spiral, thinking, how did I never hear about this genius before? To be honest, even I didn't know his name until recently. But when I read about him, I felt that the scholars and geniuses we know are just a tiny fraction of Ayyas's intelligence. You might think I'm exaggerating, but I haven't even mentioned any of the incredible stories I read about this brilliant man. Real events that happened to him. So, should I continue with the next part of Judge Ayas's story? Or should we end it here and move on to a new tale? Write your opinion in the comments. Your response will determine whether we continue or not. Also, share the title of a historical story that you find inspiring and engaging. I'll respond to all your comments. Hey guys, last time you witnessed the rise of a genius from the sands of Basra, a boy whose mind baffled grown men before his beard had even grown. You saw how Ayyas ibn Muawiyah unraveled the tricks of snakes and shadows with the blade of pure logic. But that was only the beginning. In this part, we step deeper into the courtroom where Ayyas ruled not with force, but with frightening precision. Today, you'll witness the case of the two claimants, where Ayyas exposes a liar without asking a single question. The suspicious cry, a trial that turns on a single sound Ayyas hears, and no one else notices. Hold on. I smell betrayal. Yes you, haven't watched the first part of the video, have you? I won't start this part until you go and watch the previous video right now, because if you haven't watched it, you won't understand this part as they are connected. Believe me, I promise you will dive deep into the story due to the suspense and creativity. And don't forget on your way to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and a beautiful comment like you, and then come back to watch this video. And now, where were we? Brace yourself, because these stories will make you wonder if Ayyas was reading minds, not just laws. Let's return to a time when justice had a sharp tongue, and its name was Ayyas ibn Muawiyah. You're lounging beneath the date palms in your courtyard, because even brilliant judges need a break, when a guard rushes in, all red-faced and breathless. A widow is waiting at the court. She's distraught. Her husband has died suddenly, And though everyone assumes it was an unfortunate accident, some say a fall, others whisper poison, she insists something darker is at play. You sigh, straighten your robe, and head to court. There she stands, veiled, trembling, her voice cracking like a worn lute string. "He was murdered," she says, "and the man who did it walks freely." You ask for evidence. She has none. You ask for witnesses. None of those either. The audience is shifting in their seats, half sympathetic, half exhausted. You've heard 1,000 false accusations before. But something's different this time. Her grief isn't performative. It's the kind of grief that sticks to the air. So you say what you always say when the path forward isn't obvious. "Bring me silence." And silence obeys. Then you ask to speak to the man she accuses. A well-known merchant. Polished beard, precise diction, gold-threaded sleeves. He plays the part of the shocked acquaintance well, concerned, indignant, even weepy when prompted. He tells the court that the widow is just struggling, that she needs time, that she's mistaken, confused. You nod. Then you do something a little odd. You summon both the widow and the accused and ask them to recount the last day the deceased man was seen alive. Separately, in private. Here's where things crack. The merchant's story has a small detail, the time of afternoon prayers. He says they performed it together at the merchant's home, a touching sign of friendship. But the widow says her husband had come home early that day, sweaty from the sun, annoyed at the dust, and hadn't mentioned any prayer. You don't jump, you don't accuse. Instead, you ask the widow what shoes her husband was wearing that day. "His leather sandals," she replies, "the ones he never wears to the merchant's house. He says they bring bad luck." Curious. You dig deeper. Next day, you send for the sandals. And with them, you send a quietly worded message to a local boy. His job? Walk to the merchant's home and ask about a delivery. Something trivial. And just look at the floor inside the courtyard. When the boy returns, he brings with him a fragment of dried mud and a nervous blink. "There's a footprint," he says, "still there, one side worn." The imprint matches the widow's description of her husband's old sandals, heel nearly flat, the toe worn at an angle. He had been there, but the merchant said he never arrived. Interesting. You summon the merchant again. Calmly. Then you drop it. "So tell me, when you performed afternoon prayers with him, did you notice his limp?" He freezes. "A limp?" "There was no limp," he says quickly, "just fatigue." But you press gently, conversationally, because he had a thorn in his foot that morning. Limped all day, even at home. "I thought surely you would have noticed." "You're bluffing. The limp wasn't mentioned by anyone." But now the merchant is pale, stammering. Moments later, he's begging for forgiveness. Turns out there was a limp, the thorn, the sandals, the lie. Every thread led here. And the merchant? He had feared that the widow's husband would expose a corrupt business deal. So he poisoned his evening tea, then staged a fall down the stairs. Classic overkill. Mainstream historians agree that this case cemented your legacy as a judge who could unravel deception with nothing more than a shrug and a question. A quirky side note. Some versions of the story say the merchant's parrot, yes, he had a parrot, started mimicking the man's confession days later, shouting, "Don't drink it," every time someone poured tea. Whether that part's true. Let's just say historians really argue about it. But the central point stands. You don't need scrolls of law or thunderous lectures. You just need to pay attention to the details no one thinks matter. That's what separates you from other judges. They wait for the truth to arrive, all neat and confessed. You lure it out, like a fisherman with no net, just intuition and a splash of provocation. And yet, you're never cruel. When the widow weeps at the merchant's confession, you rise and help her sit. You tell her, truth has its own time. Today, it happened to be yours. The court is silent again. Even the birds seem to hush. But your work isn't done. Within a week, another man arrives, this time with a severed goat's ear. Yeah, you heard that right. He claims his neighbour's dog attacked his prized goat in the night. The neighbour denies even owning a dog. The goat is dead. The ear is, well, it's evidence in a very unsettling way. Instead of investigating the ear or smelling it, as one poorly advised guard suggested, you walk to the neighbour's house, no warning. Just you and your sandals, the ones you always wear on gut-feeling days. You knock, no answer, so you walk around back and look at the garden wall. It's scratched, lightly, as though something with claws had tried to climb it recently. You turn to a boy lounging nearby and ask, "Has the neighbour fed a dog lately?" The boy shrugs. "Just the brown one," he says. "Comes by every night for bones." That's all you need. You return to court, summon the neighbour and simply ask, "Did you train the dog to attack, or was that just its hobby?" The man folds instantly. Historians still argue whether this case involved actual physical evidence, or if you simply played on the man's guilt. But what's uncontested is your success rate. You didn't need confessions. You didn't rely on hearsay. You built your verdicts from breadcrumbs no one else saw. Sometimes, literally. You've had court assistants chase pigeons with suspicious crumbs in their beaks because you suspected they were carrying stolen bread as bribes. You're the kind of judge who believes that even birds can testify if you're patient enough. And the people? They start to believe you're more than clever, that you're blessed, not divine, just touched by something higher. Insight, maybe. Or just a really uncanny ability to read guilty body language. The widow's case becomes a kind of folk tale. Mothers use it to warn their sons. Lie if you must, but never in front of Ayyas. By now, you've become something of a myth in your own lifetime. You don't just listen to words. You read the pauses between them, the flex of a wrist, the blink that lingers a little too long. They say you once solved a land dispute by watching how dust clung to the hem of a man's robe. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter anymore. The legend is doing its own walking. In the great city of Basra, during the noble era of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the people were blessed with a judge whose name travelled far and wide like the desert wind. Ayyas ibn Muawiyah. A man not only of deep knowledge, but of piercing insight and brilliance that confounded liars and delighted the honest. His courtroom was not like any other. It was a place where justice had a scent, a shape, and a soul, where the guilty feared stepping foot and the wronged walked in with hope on their shoulders. It was in this place, beneath the archways carved with verses of wisdom, and beside the marble floor polished by countless feet, that one of the most cunning liars thought he could play a trick on the sharpest judge in the land. One day, two men entered the court, wrapped in the dust of travel and the tension of dispute. The first, clearly agitated, approached Judge Ayas and said, "Sir, I gave this man a deposit of my money and asked him to keep it with him. When I asked for it, he completely denied me and said, 'You didn't give me anything and I don't even know you.'" His voice trembled with frustration and his eyes begged for justice. Ayyas turned his calm, thoughtful gaze toward the second man, who stood with an air of defensive pride. "Did this man give you anything?" The accused furrowed his brows and smirked slightly. "Me? He didn't give me anything, and I don't even know him. And if you wanted, oh our honorable judge, I could swear dozens of oaths right now that I don't know him, and I haven't taken a single penny from him." The people in the court exchanged glances. Some believed him, others were unsure. But Judge Ayas, he had already seen the truth. He could smell lies like a wolf smells prey on the wind. He knew this man would swear false oaths without blinking. A man to whom hellfire was but a word, and to whom stealing was a game. But Ayyas would not confront him directly. No, he would expose him in a way the man would never expect. So he turned to the first man and asked, "Where exactly did you give him the money?" The man responded, "Under a tree not far from here, a little outside the city." Ayyas nodded slowly and turned to the man. "Now go to that tree. You may have misplaced it. Check the location carefully, then come back to me. Don't rush." Without hesitation, the man turned and left the courtroom. But the liar stayed seated, comfortable now, certain he had outsmarted even the great Ayyas. He reclined slightly, even laughed at a comment from a bystander. He watched other cases unfold, unaware that his own judgment had already begun. Ayyas sat quietly, ruling case after case. A man seeking his neighbor's goat, a dispute over land, a woman asking for her delayed dowry. But all the while, his sharp mind was watching the liar, how he shifted, how he relaxed, how he breathed easier as time passed. Until at one perfect moment, Ayyas turned suddenly to the man and asked with calm precision, "What do you think? Do you think your friend has reached the tree by now?" Startled, the man answered without thinking, "No, impossible. It's too far away and takes a long time." There was a silence in the courtroom, a stillness. Ayyas leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with steel. "Ah, you enemy of God! Do you think the court is a kindergarten? You lied to us, and I fell into the trap you set. How did you know the place was far away? How did you know it would take so long to get there?" Gasps filled the courtroom. The conman froze. His mouth opened, but no words came. Ayyas stood, his voice now ringing like a sword unsheathed. "Arrest him! Lock him up! This is a liar who unjustly plundered people's money." The guards seized him as he tried to protest, but it was too late. The crowd whispered in awe of the judge's brilliance. Moments later, the first man returned, confused. "Judge, I found nothing under the tree, and no one is there." Ayyas looked at him with warmth and assurance. "Don't worry. God has revealed the truth and exposed the liar. You will get your money." Indeed, the conman's belongings were searched. Hidden within his travel sack was the full amount, untouched. The deposit was returned to its rightful owner. The liar was punished, and the people left the court with renewed faith in justice, speaking in the streets and marketplaces of the wisdom of Ayyas ibn Muawiyah, the man who could expose a lie without a single drop of anger, only with calm, logic, and the truth. Now, your courtroom feels more like a stage for stories than a house of law. Stories with plot twists, unreliable narrators, and the occasional goat. People come not only for justice, but for the spectacle of watching you untangle it. You're the quiet storm in the center of it all, and tonight, the storm brews early. A caravan leader limps into court, supported by two sons. His prized necklace, an heirloom passed down from his grandfather, is missing. Vanished. He suspects his own nephew, who had joined the caravan journey days before the theft. The problem? The nephew is convincing. Too convincing. He says he never touched the necklace, never even saw it. He even swears on his mother's grave. The crowd murmurs. The caravan leader's sons look ready to throw punches, but you just nod, serene. Everyone calm, you say. We'll let the necklace speak. People blink. You ask to inspect the caravan's travel gear. All of it. Bags, tents, satchels, even the empty food jars. Your assistants groan, but they know better than to question you at this point. You spot a jar that smells faintly of cardamom and something else. Wax? You gently tip it. A soft clink. Inside, the necklace, dipped in melted wax and stuffed beneath the spice. You say nothing. You just place it gently on the table, wait for everyone to stare at it, then look straight at the nephew. He wilts. Turns out he panicked halfway through the journey, afraid he'd be caught. So he disguised the necklace using candle wax and cardamom, thinking no one would look twice at a spice jar. Mainstream historians always mention this case when discussing your layered logic. How you didn't just listen to testimony, you read the world around it. The caravan leader never saw that jar touched, never thought of it as suspicious. But you? You understood human cowardice. You knew that guilt hides in the least likely place. Here's the fringe detail, though. Some storytellers say you figured out where to look because the thief smelled faintly sweet when he passed you. Like a bakery with secrets, you reportedly muttered. Scholars love to debate whether that quote is real. But you know what? Even if it's made up, it's not wrong. And now we come to the case that arguably became your most famous. It's known today in bedtime story circles and among overexcited law students as the case of the talking tree. Here's how it starts. A poor man walks into court with a wild claim. His neighbor has built a fence through his land, and the only witness to prove it is a tree. Not a scribe, not a neighbor. A tree. You pause. Blink. "Excuse me," you ask. He doubles down. The tree, he says, used to shade his family's tent when he was a child. It was on their side of the property. But now, suddenly, it's inside the neighbor's fence. Clearly, the land was stolen, and the tree proves it. Most judges would have laughed him out. But not you. Instead, you say, "Let's go talk to the tree." People follow, confused but intrigued. You reach the land in question and ask both parties to stand by the fence. You walk over to the tree yourself, pat its trunk like an old friend, and stare at the soil. A gentle breeze sways the leaves. Then you call out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Tree. On whose land do you grow?" There's silence. People chuckle. But you're not joking. You turn back to the neighbor and say, "Strange." The tree refused to answer. "Maybe you should come ask it yourself." The neighbor walks forward, confused. When he returns, you ask, "Well, what did it say?" He replies, "Nothing. It's just a tree." And you smile. "So how did you know I wasn't standing on your land?" He freezes, because he's just admitted, accidentally, that the tree does not grow on his property. It's simple, elegant, and devastating. The crowd erupts. Your assistants chuckle. Even the birds seem to chirp louder that day. Historians still argue whether this actually happened, the scholars will say centuries later, or whether it was a parable invented to teach logic. But the cleverness of it, that's never questioned. You knew human minds better than they knew themselves. You knew that liars always over-explain, that the guilty often try too hard to appear innocent, and that nothing is more revealing than a simple question asked at the right moment. Like the time a fisherman claimed his net had been stolen, he accused a rival, insisted that only he knew how to weave the special knots in the mesh. The rival denied it flatly. You nodded, asked to see the net, and held it up. Then you did something weird. You tossed it into a barrel of water. Everyone waited. When you pulled it out, the water had turned slightly reddish, barely noticeable. You rubbed your fingers together, then sniffed. Pomegranate sap, you said. Turns out, the real owner always dipped his net in pomegranate sap to strengthen the threads. A trick passed down from his father. The thief didn't know that, and had unknowingly returned the net still marked with that subtle signature. Justice, you once said, is in the juice. Okay, you probably didn't say that, but the people said it for you, and let's be honest, it sounds pretty catchy. Over the years, people kept waiting for the day you'd be stumped. That one case, that one riddle, that even your sharp mind couldn't untangle. It never came, because your secret wasn't sorcery or divine whispers. It was patience, listening, waiting for truth to trip over its own shoelaces. Even when the case seemed ridiculous, like the boy who accused a donkey of theft. Yes, really. You treated it seriously. You investigated. You asked questions. You even patted the donkey. And no, the donkey didn't confess. But the boy eventually did. He'd sold a family trinket and blamed the animal. Not because he was cruel, just scared. And you forgave him, because you weren't just clever. You were fair. A man could be brilliant and still cruel. But you were kind. And that's what made people trust you. You didn't solve mysteries for applause. You did it so people could sleep at night, knowing the world still had someone who saw clearly, even when others didn't. And maybe that's why you're remembered centuries later, not because of the smudges, or the parrots, or the tree that didn't talk, but because you did. And every word you spoke made the world a little more honest. Now, let's let everything slow down. The crowd has gone home. The court is quiet. The candles flicker low, casting long shadows on the stone walls where your footsteps once echoed. You ease out of the story and back into your room. Wherever you are, maybe you're curled up in bed, the sheets pulled up to your chin. Maybe there's a fan whirring gently in the corner, or a night breeze rattling the windows. Wherever you are, the storm of stories has passed. Ayyas ibn Muawiyah's wisdom didn't come from books alone. It came from watching, from listening to people breathe between sentences, from knowing that truth doesn't always arrive dressed in armor. It tiptoes in, barefoot, afraid, often disguised as something small. And now, you're a part of those stories too. You walked with the judge through spice markets and crooked alleys. You saw how silence can be louder than shouting, and how sometimes the smartest person in the room is the one who asks the simplest question. So tonight, let that be enough. Let your thoughts settle like sand in a jar. Let your breath soften, your hands relax, your eyes grow heavy. Justice has been served. Stories have been told. And you? You've earned your sleep. Tell me in the comments, which judgment surprised you the most? And if you love long, immersive stories from history that feel like mysteries, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. We're just getting started, so close your eyes, drift back through the cases, the whispers, the quiet wisdom of a man who always knew how to find the truth, even in the dark. Until next time, sleep well, dream of wisdom, and remember, the past is never boring when told the right way. Sweet dreams.